I'm Elizabeth Lincecum, Communications Director at the North Carolina Institute for Constitutional Law. Welcome back to our series, Cornerstone Commentaries. Today our guest is Justice Robert Orr, who will discuss the amendment process.
With the new General Assembly now in session, we're likely to see a number of proposed constitutional amendments introduced in the legislature. The process for amending the North Carolina Constitution is set out in Article 13 of the Constitution, and it really provides two ways. One is by constitutional convention, although it's been years since that's been used, but more frequently it's by passage of the General Assembly of a proposed constitutional amendment, which is then submitted to the voters. It's important to note that for a proposed amendment to pass, it has to be passed by 3/5 of the members in each house. The other interesting point is that the actual language of the constitutional amendment doesn't appear on the ballot. In fact, the General Assembly gets to craft the question that will be submitted to voters. And I have to confess, there have been occasions when one might conclude that the actual meaning of the constitutional amendment was not properly reflected in the question submitted to the voters. But assuming in this case that the question is properly framed, then the General Assembly determines at what election the question will be voted on. Usually it's in even number of years in the general election, but there's nothing to preclude the General Assembly from having the vote in a primary or even a special election. There is a Constitutional Amendment Commission comprised of the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, and a staff member from the General Assembly that is required at least 60 days prior to the election to do a simple explanation of what the constitutional amendment is about and send out a press release to that effect. But the bottom line is the constitutional amendments usually end up at the bottom of the ballot, right past the election for Soil and Water Conservation Board members, and very little attention is usually paid to what that amendment does. And yet, when you think about it, the importance of amending our state constitution is something that all voters need to be well aware of. So in the coming months, as proposed amendments are passed and prepared to be submitted to the voters, I would encourage people to go to the General Assembly website and make sure you understand what rights and liberties are at stake with these proposed constitutional amendments.
And remember, the Constitution is the cornerstone of all law.